welcome to North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with an entrepreneur from Mount Calvary, Wisconsin, Dale Maney of HEC. Welcome, Dale. How are you doing today?
Fantastic. Welcome.
Awesome. So you're an ex-diesel and hydraulics technician. How did you make the decision to become an inventor and entrepreneur?
Oh, there's a lot of steps between that and here. I was a technician back in the 80s. I went from that into sales. I was in sales for 22 years, selling farm equipment and construction equipment. But all along the way, also, I had my own tree spade service or tree transplanting business, Maney tree moving service also. So I'm operating equipment all the time. And in 2012, 2013, when I went full time into that, operating my own equipment, you run into things on a more regular basis that just annoy you. And as a problem solver, I went about trying to solve the problem that was before me.
That's awesome. And do you have an agriculture background? What is your background?
I do. Grew up in a large dairy farm back then. We had about 100 milking cows, a little bit north of here. And so, yes, I was the young tractor driver. So, in fact, I kind of remember when my initial real interest in equipment began, or from a mechanical standpoint. I used to do a lot of the fall plowing, and my dad, we'd park the tractor in the shed overnight. My dad would fill it with fuel the next morning, and he'd send me out again. But he was filling the tractor with fuel, and I'm thinking to myself, this tractor is developing enough horsepower to pull this 5-bottom plow through this heavy red clay with nothing more than this liquid that he's pouring in the diesel tank.
Right.
How does that work?
Pretty amazing.
That was the beginning of my fascination with equipment. Yes.
Wow. So how does hose end chamber work?
What the hose end chamber is, it's a specially designed expansion chamber that couples onto the end of the hose on any hydraulic implement or attachment that you're not using, that's out of service. And what it does is it prevents the high pressures that build up in your hydraulics from thermal expansion, from the temperature changes of the day. And the thing is, it doesn't require high temperatures to build up these high pressures. It just requires a temperature change from warm to cold, or from cold to warm. So your overnight temperatures, which is considerably cooler, and then in the morning when the temperature starts to rise, the pressure starts to build in this, and the hose end chamber prevents that.
Wow. So you ran some tests, or you regularly run tests.
Yes.
Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, we've got our data logger, which is a scientific piece of instrument. It's an electronic gadget that pull the data off of this, you hook it back into the computer. But what we've got is just a coupler on it, so we can plug that into anything we want to test. So I'm regularly testing hydraulic cylinders and to pull up the data as to what's going on. So for an example, we tested this grapple bucket for 2 weeks straight. So what we found was that this was the week before we hooked the hose end chamber on. So the blue lines here is the pressure that it would go to every day.
Oh, wow.
The red lines is because what this is doing is reading, it's taking a pressure and a temperature reading around the clock. You can set it at whatever interval you want. I think at this point in time, we had it set at every 15 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's recording what's happening within that cylinder. So every day from a time period of about 9 in the morning till about 3 in the afternoon, the temperatures would climb anywhere between 1,400 psi and 2,000 psi.
Wow.
It's crazy. But the important thing there also is this green line is at 400 psi. We found that with anything more than 400 psi in the lines behind these coupler tips, and these couplers are locked up. You can't get them open. So that's where the struggle with our customers come from trying to hook up, because look at all of this time during the day that coupler would have been locked up. That equipment, where the customers are thinking that equipment is sitting there doing nothing,
Mhm.
under a lot of stress and strain. So then the next week, what we did is hook the hose end chamber onto the end hose, and you can see what happened with the blue line, it just flatlined.
Right. Wow, that's a big difference.
The pressure is gone. So now at any point you can hook up your hoses without a hassle, without a struggle, which is really cool. Temperatures are still there, pressure is gone. So now your equipment is truly sitting there doing nothing.
Right. So how is thermal expansion a problem for the implement, but not the tractor?
The cool thing is that with the on the tractor, you have a hydraulic reservoir built into the unit, and a tractor, a skid loader, truck, whatever your hydraulics is. The reservoir is on the carrier or the prime mover. So any expansion that's happening within the system on that, there's enough leakage through the internal valving machine to bleed back to the tank and not cause any pressure.
I
But
see.
on the implement or attachment, there's nowhere for the oil to expand and go, so it builds these enormous pressures.
Right. So can you just plumb the hose end chamber permanently to the hydraulic equipment or no?
No. Short answer, no. What happens was with a piece of hydraulic implement like this, like an attachment or something, where the oil is actually doing work, where it's building pressure to lift the load or move a load or doing something. By putting an expansion chamber in there permanently, it would give it a spring effect. You wouldn't have precise movement. It would be uncontrollable. Could it be done? You'd have to do a bunch of valving, a bunch of electronics. To do that on an implement would not be practical or efficient. It'd be expensive. So not really.
Moving on to the industry generally, what are you seeing that are the biggest challenges right now in our industry?
Uh, well, there's a lot of different things. On the prime movers, on the tractors and things, is just all the emission controls that they're working through, the bugs and issues with that. On my end of things is the industry. Much of the industry is just not aware that this is happening with their equipment.
Right.
The hose end chamber, the initial design of the hose end chamber was really just to prevent damage from these harmful pressures that the equipment exposed to, just to prevent. But the low hanging fruit became the fact that it allows you to couple up your hoses with no issues. That's really cool. So that's why people are buying it. The second fact that now their equipment is now stress free. With all of the testing that we're doing and recognizing that the kind of pressures that this stuff is sitting under all the time, I'm starting to believe that a lot of stress is putting on. We're almost causing more stress with the equipment in storage than when we're using it. Because the thing with when the equipment is hooked up to the tractor and being used, it's being protected by the tractor's relief valve. The pressure in that system can only ever go as high as the relief valve setting on the tractor, which is anywhere from 2,200 PSI to now they're sneaking up towards 3,000 PSI. So it can't go over that, but it will only ever go to the pressure that's required to move the load. So if the load can be lifted at 1,400 PSI, that's where it'll go. But the thing is, what we're finding, our equipment is going to 2,000 PSI every day sitting in the shed doing nothing.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy. And then we also tested a cylinder. We had, at these farm shows that we go to, we had countless customers telling us of how many cylinders and hoses they've had blow up sitting doing nothing over the years. And my daughter, which helps me at the show, says that we ought to test that. So we did. We bought this cylinder, a brand new 3x8 cylinder, tie rod cylinder, and I bought that specifically because of a particular reason. Put 4 foot of hoses on it, put the coupler tips on it, filled it with oil, but never hooked it. It was never hooked to a piece of equipment. So then we put our data logger on it, hooked the little data logger on it, parked it outside, out front of the shop, and left it sit there. It took 5 days
Wow.
because of the particular weather. 5 days of pressure spikes when one day it went to just short of 3,500 PSI. And I knew something was happening because I happened to be working in the area that day, and I could see the oil forming underneath it. And I didn't want to touch it and see the results. But what had happened was it hit that 3,500 PSI. It cracked the cast iron end cap
Wow.
through the fitting, essentially destroying the cylinder. I mean, it's no longer valid. So yeah, these things can happen. It wasn't as dramatic as what we hoped for. We hoped it would blow up, but it still ruined the cylinder. Now, the reason we selected this, or I selected this tie rod cylinder, was because they're rated for a lower pressure than the welded cylinders. And we wanted to test that because there's a lot of these cylinders out there in the industry. So when they're on a lot of implements and stuff, so, they're exposed to the same phenomenon that everything else is. So they're more vulnerable than some of the other pieces.
Oh, that's great. So can people order these online?
Online, or they can phone. We are back in 2019. We started setting up dealers. We hope to do a larger dealer organization, but then COVID hit and slowed that whole process down. So, but yeah, we do have a few dealers, but for the most part, you can do it online or you can call in.
And that's hosenchamber.com, right?
Hosenchamber.com.
That's awesome. So one more question. What fires you up? What makes you get out of bed in the morning?
Just the love of equipment. I mean, you're just a bit of a workaholic, so feel like you need to accomplish something. But yeah, it's fun helping people. It's fun taking the phone calls with these hose and chambers. I had one last fall. A guy called. It was really it was interesting. He called. He had a telehandler and a hydraulic blower of some sort that he used on it. He described his problem. He says, will this cure that? And he says he's been struggling with it. He says he went to his hydraulics place. They really couldn't suggest anything. They gave him a couple of tips. He went to his dealer. They didn't really know what to do with it. He called me, will this do it? I says, 100%, 100%. He then a couple of weeks later, he calls back and God, I hope it worked for him. But he calls back and he says, I tried it when it was cold. I tried it when it was warm. I tried it in the morning. I tried it in the afternoon. At this point, I don't know. I'm not sure where this conversation is going. If he's happy with it or not, he says it worked every time. He called back just to let us know how well it was working for him. He's so elated that he found a problem, and fairly economically. I might add that we have two sizes of chambers, the small and the large. The small chamber is only $45, and the large chamber is $75. So it's relatively economical to protect your equipment. So
Absolutely, that's worth it.
Because when this customer went back to his hydraulics place also and told him about this, he says, well, we have couple under pressure couplers we could have sold you. But what he found out is those couplers are a couple $100, so and the thing with a coupler like that too is, even if that does solve the problem of hooking up your hoses a little easier, it doesn't take the pressure off that implement for the duration that it's out of service, which is the big part of the hose and chamber. But we have three models currently. We have the S38, which is a small chamber with a 3/8-inch national pipe thread on the end fitting. We have the S12, which is also a small chamber with the 1/2-inch pipe fitting on the bottom. The S38 is more for smaller implements like snow plows, compact tractor equipment. The S12 is skid steer attachments, grapple buckets, 4-in-1 buckets, single cylinder circuits, and then the L12 would be for larger implements, multiple cylinder implements, field diggers, things along that nature. And We've got some running on bigger equipment as well in the oil fields and pile drivers where they need just a little bit more capacity. In that respect, they can put one on each hose and double the capacity of this. So it's been good. It's been good.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dale. And thanks to everybody who's watching. And if you want to learn more, all the links will be in the show notes. So you can find Dale and get your own hose end chamber for yourself on your farm. So have an awesome day.